Hello, everyone. Welcome to this new episode of the Industry Shakers. My name is Adlane Fellah, Chief Analyst at Maravedis. Today, I have the great pleasure to have as a guest Kevin Robinson, who is the President and CEO at the Wi-Fi Alliance. Hello, Kevin. How are you today?
I'm doing great and happy World Wi-Fi Day, Adlane. I'm glad that we're able to celebrate it and have a chance to sit down with you and talk about Wi-Fi, which is my favorite topic.
Well, absolutely. Happy Wi-Fi Day to all the listeners, and I'm glad that the calendar coincided with that important date. So let's dive into it because we have a packed agenda today. My first question is what are the top initiatives that the Wi-Fi Alliance is currently working on?
So it seems it always feels like it's a busy time at the Alliance. There's always so much going on, but there clearly are a few focus areas for us. I think one of the key ones is just our continued advocacy around the 6 GHz band, placing a lot of effort and energy on advocating globally for opening up that band, which really is going to be essential to the future of Wi-Fi and our ability to deliver on the connectivity expectations that I think people have for us as a technology. And I'm sure we'll dive into a little bit more deeply on that. Another key focus area for us, and this may be surprising or not surprising, but believe it or not, Wi-Fi Alliance has already kicked off the initial work around the definition and interoperability of Wi-Fi 8, which is the next generation of Wi-Fi. We still have a little bit of time before that's officially out in the market. But as you can appreciate, the work starts well in advance. And so even though we're seeing strong adoption of Wi-Fi 7 and that remains the current generation of Wi-Fi, we're leaning forward and just continuing that ongoing innovation that has really been the hallmark of the Wi-Fi industry. We're also seeing some increased work in standardization and interoperability around various applications of Wi-Fi. So this would be things like Wi-Fi sensing, Wi-Fi location that are going to be, again, specific applications of a use of Wi-Fi, maybe beyond just basic connectivity, but the ability to deliver services and enable all manner of applications. So that's another focus area. And then the final piece, which is really kind of the bread and butter of Wi-Fi Alliance, is a focus on how do we just ensure that Wi-Fi certified remains relevant and is delivering on that promise that has made Wi-Fi so successful. So the fact that you can get a product from any vendor and it is going to work well together. So looking at things like how do we make testing more efficient and more cost effective as the technology just becomes more complicated? How do we make sure the Wi-Fi certified is and those products are delivering on the overall user experience expectations? So again, a lot of really important work going on in the organization. And that's really just, I think, a sampling of what we have.
Yeah, a lot of material. Just as a parenthesis regarding Wi-Fi 8 certified, is it too early to have a date of initial product?
It's too early. We're certainly not announcing the availability of certification just yet. So the phase that we're in the Wi-Fi Alliance it's the initial requirements definition phase. And so as people may or may not know, obviously the IEEE is hard at work developing the underlying standard that will form the foundation of Wi-Fi 8. Not all of those features ultimately make it into Wi-Fi. And so we're really having those conversations around, what are the use cases that we as an industry want to make sure we're delivering in Wi-Fi certified products? Which are the features that are necessary to deliver those use cases? And this is kind of the down selection of which features out of the IEEE standard ultimately make it into what we call Wi-Fi.
Okay. Just as a reminder for the audience, please like, subscribe, share this video to keep us going. Now, in this question, obviously, you can't have a conversation without mentioning AI. So what are some of your AI-driven initiatives?
Yeah, absolutely. Many people joke that you can't be a CEO or an executive and not say AI at least like 15 times in a presentation. Yeah. So I'll try not to hit quite that many because I think it can get annoying at times. But certainly the Wi-Fi industry is really kind of at the nexus of what is happening in AI. And you could probably categorize it kind of into two main areas. So there's going to be how AI is going to enable Wi-Fi to deliver a better experience. So think of this as areas around the operation of Wi-Fi networks and how AI can make that work better. And then the second area is going to be just generally how Wi-Fi is going to enable AI. Right. So it's kind of this, it really kind of goes both ways. So when you look at things like AI in the operation of Wi-Fi. Already there's, and I'll just highlight one very specific initiative. For a number of years, Wi-Fi Alliance has been standardizing the data model for how we talk about Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi capabilities and telemetry and understanding what is happening in an environment where Wi-Fi is operating. And as anyone knows, AI data is the lifeblood of AI. So having these standardized models, and it's something called Wi-Fi data elements, which has been incorporated into other technologies and standards like TR69, TR369 by the Broadband Forum is leveraging this. But by having this standardized data model, it means that everybody knows what each of those bits are, and they don't need to recreate the wheel. So you can have, it makes it much easier to develop AI around that data. So that's just one example of where, the industry through Wi-Fi Alliance is helping to allow AI to better manage Wi-Fi networks. So, understanding what the links look like between different clients, or what the utilization or interference, all of these things that might be happening in an environment that would then cause the network to react in order to ensure that you're getting a consistent experience. Now on the other side of this, which is, okay, what are the things that Wi-Fi is going to enable with respect to AI? Well, of course, connectivity is essential. So just when you look at Wi-Fi 7 and the low latencies that we can deliver through Wi-Fi 7, that's going to be a critical piece of getting data, back to data centers to ultimately train AI models, doing that in a consistent way. But then a couple of those things I just mentioned around applications, I think Wi-Fi sensing is actually going to be a huge area where, by now understanding, movement and where people are in a Wi-Fi environment, that can then also train these AI models to do all manner of innovative things by understanding, is somebody in the room? Did maybe one of my parents fall in a room? And AI is going to be leveraging a lot of that data around channel sounding to understand what's happening and ultimately interpret it to do something useful. Again, so a lot of interesting areas. And again, this is probably just a sampling of what is to come with Wi-Fi and AI. And I'm sure when you ask me in 2 years, there's going to be a lot of other areas that we weren't even able to envision yet.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And sometimes, you have some unexpected use cases like Wi-Fi. I heard Wi-Fi sensing can be used for weapons detection in an airport based on the kind of refraction you get from the signals, and so the sky's the limit.
It is. There was actually one of the very interesting ones was we saw a demonstration where some of this can be so sensitive that we can actually see the rise and fall of a chest from an infant. And so this interesting use case was many many automobiles already have Wi-Fi in the vehicle. And of course, you have horrible tragedies where people may inadvertently leave a child in the back of their vehicle, run into work. They didn't realize that they were supposed to drop their kid at school, or they go into a grocery store, and the car could then actually alert passersby, like honking the horn or sending a notification when they realize that there is actually somebody still in the car and that car is heating up. So, I mean, it's everything from, the gaming and all the fun stuff to some very critical applications that can potentially save lives.
Yes, yes. Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening to our video interviews and content with industry shakers. I just want to share quickly, because we get a lot of people asking, how can we work with Maravedis and what do you guys do? So besides the actual research reports, we have 3 ways you can work with us, from marketing essentials to marketing pro and custom projects. So Marketing Essential is basically a marketing program for startups, for small companies with limited budgets and limited experience and resources, where we can help them maintain a constant flow of content through our content engine. We hear very often, I want to do this blog, but I forgot about it. I don't have time. I don't have any ideas what to write about. I don't know what to tell, how to say it. I'm just too busy, etc. So, the program starts at $5,000 and provides you with a number of deliverables and outputs that we can agree on together. Because that's 6 to 12 months agreements for more sophisticated, larger organizations, we have Marketing Pro, where we can have everything that's included in the marketing essentials and add to it some of the strategic marketing aspects such as positioning, reviewing your sales pitch deck, etc. So we work very closely with both your product managers and your sales team. With the product managers, because we really want to understand your technology stack very well so we can talk intelligently about it. And with your BDM and sales folks to understand, and where the friction comes from, how we can reduce the sales cycle, which tend to be very long with ISPs, and really help them, nurture their leads and be much more effective in their work. And then finally, we have custom projects where we can look at a particular project that you have in mind. That usually those are sizable projects, and again, every customer is different. So yeah, talk to us. Let's dive now into IoT and Wi-Fi HALow. Focusing on low power. How are you addressing this cross-regional spectrum harmonization, interoperability, and general use cases?
Sure. So I think the first thing I would start off with is it's really exciting to see the beginning, kind of the beginnings of adoption around Wi-Fi HALow. We've been talking about it for a while, but like anything, moving into an entirely new band is always a major endeavor. I mean, look at how long it took Wi-Fi to move into the 5 GHz band, years ago, and we're seeing rapid adoption in the 6 GHz band. So Wi-Fi HALow, as you alluded to, is an entirely new band for Wi-Fi. It's in the sub 1 GHz band, and it has some great properties around it just because of the propagation you get in that band. You're able to either get very very long distances, multiple kilometers of distance with all the usual benefits of Wi-Fi, IP native, the same security mechanisms that you get in Wi-Fi. So you can get that range, but you can also just get a more robust connection. So if you're in an environment where maybe you want sensors down in a basement and you've got to get through thick concrete walls and maybe floors, that can be challenging sometimes for the more traditional Wi-Fi operating in 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. So Wi-Fi HALow kind of brings those capabilities. Now, one of the challenges for Wi-Fi HALow, as you alluded to, is the spectrum is not as harmonized as what you see with 2.4 gigahertz. And in fact, when you think about that harmonization, that global harmonization in 2.4, it's part of what fueled the success of Wi-Fi, because you could scale, right? You were able to develop radios and chipsets that could be sold anywhere in the world. So, getting that harmonized spectrum is incredibly important for the Wi-Fi industry, and that 902 to 928 megahertz band. It is still something that we're working on. We're certainly not where we'd want to be now in terms of that harmonization. But I think as more and more policymakers and regulators start to see the benefits that Wi-Fi HALow can bring, we're certainly optimistic that they're going to become more open to harmonization of that band. But just to be very very upfront, it's still certainly a challenge in certain geographies, and it's something that is ultimately limiting or constraining the benefits that those geographies might be able to see compared to if they had opened up that band.
Okay. Well, since we are on the topic of spectrum, the big topic is of course 6 gigahertz and what's the state worldwide. And I know that the 3G of the cellular camp is trying to get some of that spectrum reserved for them, and that creates some uncertainty. What can you tell us about that?
Sure. So the most important thing to take away, of course, is that the 6 gigahertz band is essential to the future success of Wi-Fi. There's no doubt about it. Wi-Fi Alliance and the rest of the industry continues to kind of press for the opening of that band globally, and specifically the full 1200 megahertz. We're seeing very strong momentum. So we're well over 60 countries now that have opened up at least part of the band. Most recently, and I'm sure you and others are following this, most recently India opened up the lower portion of the band. So again, we're continuing to see that momentum. I think one of the challenges and where we're placing a lot of focus is the conversation happening in Europe right now, as I think many people expect that those conversations with the EU as well as with Ofcom in the UK are going to start influencing other countries. And I mean, influencing, it's people may start to kind of fall in line where they see commonality. And so we continue to push for the full 1200 megahertz. It's interesting in that, for 25 years, Wi-Fi has really proven its ability to coexist with other technologies, either other unlicensed technologies or in the 6 gigahertz band, where we've been able to coexist with incumbents that are already there. So for a regulator or policymaker, it's kind of the best of both worlds, because you get the benefits of Wi-Fi, those economic benefits, the other intangible benefits, but you also don't need to displace incumbents. We can coexist with those incumbents. And so, if you look at, the US, we've certainly seen a lot of success using the full 1200 megahertz. And in Europe, again, conversation around the lower portion already being available. Some countries like the UK are looking at how they could potentially have a portion of the upper band prioritized for IMT. Our position is we see a definite opportunity for Wi-Fi to move into the band immediately while those conversations are happening around, is there a need for prioritized IMT access in the upper part of the band? What might the sharing mechanisms look like so that Wi-Fi could make use of the band when IMT is not present? But in the meantime, there's no reason to slow down or block the benefits that you could get from Wi-Fi today. So just with the example of the UK, I think they've set an expectation that they would like to see Wi-Fi get access to the entire band prior to the end of this year, prior to the end of 2025, while those conversations are ongoing around IMT with the upper 6 gigahertz. And the Alliance is certainly helping in those conversations, as is the rest of the industry.
Yeah.
But I guess the final point I would make is, when you look at particularly in enterprise use cases and applications, it is incredibly important that they have predictability and confidence that spectrum will be available for their deployments. It goes into how they go about planning Wi-Fi networks. And so priority access in that upper part of the band is going to be essential for those enterprise deployments that are so crucial to commercial activity around the globe.
Yeah, I can imagine that the level of uncertainty around regulation that does prevent some key decisions to be made on the investment side. Now, I think it's a good segue to the topic of convergence, right, between Wi-Fi and cellular. We talk about spectrum, but at the end of the day, there's indoors, outdoors, and each technology has a part to play. What's your view and vision on that?
Well, I guess I'll build on the way you teed up that question, in that every technology has a part to play. This really should not be a Wi-Fi versus cellular conversation. It should be a conversation around, people depend on connectivity. And in order to deliver that connectivity, we need a collection of technologies. And frankly, cellular and Wi-Fi are the two most widely used technologies in delivering this. And we tend to be very complementary in nature, right? So cellular is going to deliver wide area networking. Period. Wi-Fi is never going to give you connectivity doing 110 kilometers an hour, down the expressway. And quite frankly, cellular is highly unlikely that cellular is going to be able to deliver the connectivity necessary indoors in a way that is economically feasible. And so if you just kind of understand those 2 points, why it's so important that we find ways for cellular and Wi-Fi to work well together for seamless handoff between the two technologies, because ultimately that's going to allow service providers to deliver high performance connectivity for these quote 5G use cases and applications wherever their subscribers are. And they're going to be able to do it in a much more cost-effective manner than if they were required to deploy 5G networks everywhere that the user is, including indoors. So again, I think if people are kind of really honest about what we need to deliver in connectivity, they would understand how important the convergence of Wi-Fi and cellular in fact is. Now, there's a lot of initiatives going on to help in that area of convergence and that seamless handoff. Of course, there is Passpoint and OpenRoaming, which are 2 technologies that Wi-Fi Alliance and the Wireless Broadband Alliance are working on. And we're continuing to work together to make both of those technologies as successful as possible. But I think it starts with kind of getting out of these, let's say, almost want to say like religious wars around Wi-Fi versus
Yeah.
cellular, and instead stand shoulder to shoulder and say, how can our two industries together deliver on the next generation of connectivity? And it's going to require both technologies.
Yeah, I mean, I've been around the block for a while, and I do remember the WiMAX days and how that technology was, very promising. But then the 3GPP camp didn't necessarily embrace it, and unfortunately, that ended there. But no, I couldn't agree more with you. Than Wi-Fi is here to stay, and it's doing a fabulous job in to provide connectivity indoors at the lowest cost and for billions of people. So there's a solution trying to find a problem here. You mentioned the WBA collaboration on Passpoint and OpenRoaming. Are there other initiatives you're working on with the WBA?
Yeah, so Wi-Fi Alliance and the Wireless Broadband Alliance have had an ongoing partnership relationship for many years. Probably still the predominant area where we focus is in this area of kind of seamless roaming between cellular and Wi-Fi networks. So particularly around OpenRoaming and Passpoint. While we collaborate in other areas, that's really I think the one area where we most benefit from the expertise of the other organization and from the reach of each organization and kind of who they represent within the ecosystem. Even though both those technologies have been around for some time, we continue to evolve them. So, typically the way we would collaborate is, Wireless Broadband Alliance might be identifying, some particular use cases or, maybe challenges that service providers are seeing in the adoption of Passpoint OpenRoaming. And through those discussions, we're able to determine, okay, well, where do we need to extend the technology? Where maybe do we need to increase testing coverage to address gaps in the behaviors of devices? And so what has come out of that are a number of revisions and an evolution of the technology, as well as revisions and increased guidelines around how you go about actually deploying this. Because often one of the challenges isn't so much that whether the technology can accomplish what you need to. It's okay, well, you need to know how to actually deploy the technology. It's often in the configuration or the deployment of it. And I think between the two organizations, we're making a lot of positive strides in helping the consistent deployment of those technologies out in the field.
Yeah, thank you. And then my final question, and the one always comes back, and I hear it all the time from select, some service providers love to say this, the fact that, or the perception of Wi-Fi is less secure than cellular, and feel free to rant.
I'll start by saying people are either misinformed or frankly dishonest. Let's just leave it at that right now. I'm gonna be charitable. I'm gonna say that they're all just misinformed, right? Let's take that charitable view of it. The fact is, Wi-Fi and cellular deliver comparable levels of security when you're doing an apples to apples comparison of deployment scenarios, right? So if you look at deployment scenarios where you have subscribers who have a relationship with the manager of the network. So I would equate that similar to an enterprise environment where you have employees, right? You can deploy Wi-Fi in a way that is just as, if not more secure than cellular. Period, full stop. That's just the way it is, right? I think one of the things that gives, let's say, some of the critics an opening here is the breadth of deployment scenarios for Wi-Fi is just so much bigger than cellular, right? So again, cellular is very much, you're generally doing handsets. Yes, I realize that there are some SIM-enabled laptops out there, but it tends to be a fairly narrow set of category of devices. And they are all subscribers. So that's the deployment scenario. Whereas Wi-Fi, we span everything from on one end, the deliberately and intentionally open networks that people want to deploy, right? That do not have any authentication whatsoever, all the way up to very demanding and highly sensitive networks that might be finance, private networks for finance or military. So an example there would be things like the CNSA, which is the Commercial National Security Algorithm Suite, that allows things like top secret data to be transmitted over Wi-Fi. We can span all those different deployment scenarios And it does give people an opening to cherry pick and say, well, let's look at the security in, let's say, an open network. Well, by definition, an open network doesn't really have much security to it, right? Because you're not authenticating people. But again, when you do an apples to apples comparison, Wi-Fi absolutely can deliver comparable levels of security. And in fact, we're doing a lot of work in how do you even extend that great security into some of those more open network environments. So things like opportunistic wireless encryption, where there's no authentication, but you can still deliver some level of security and encryption of that data traffic. Client isolation is another example. So, people are not able to eavesdrop on what might be going across those links. So again, I think it's a little bit, again, disingenuous with some of the people who make that critique, but they may have their motives. They may have their motives around it. I think the other area I would actually highlight is the ongoing development of an innovation in security in Wi-Fi. So already there are efforts underway looking at, okay, so when quantum computers come up, how do we get ahead with quantum resistant cryptography? And there are already efforts underway of how do we start incorporating that into Wi-Fi? So I think people can feel very confident that Wi-Fi not only delivers the security they need today, but it's going to continue to deliver on their security needs well into the future.
Yeah, no, I think it's important to keep clarifying and demystifying some of those misconceptions. And thank you for it. That's all for today. Thank you very much, Kevin, for sharing your insights with us today. Folks, please don't forget to subscribe to our weekly newsletter and to the next episode. Thank you, Kevin.
Great. Thank you. And happy World Wi-Fi Day.
Happy World Wi-Fi Day.